Accidental Love by Gary Soto. Chapter 1. At 14, Marissa welcomed any excuse to miss school, but today she had a good reason for cutting class. Alicia, her best friend, lay in a hospital with a broken leg and a broken heart, all because her boyfriend had crashed his parents' car when a tire blew. The leg had broken in a crash, but her heart had broken when the glove compartment opened on impact and shot out a photo of stupid Roberto with his arm around another girl. Marissa was off to give her homegirl a meaningful hug. He's such a shisty rat, she growled as she pictured that no good Roberto, an average looking fool whose fingers were always orange from Cheetos. She too savored that junk food snack, but she argued at least she always licked her fingers clean. But not him, stupid jerk. Big pendejo. How could Alicia stand his face? She was always treating him to food and paying for gas for their car rides into the country. Marissa's anger was deflected to a passing station wagon that nearly hit her as she started across the street. You stupid. She spat as she threw her hands into the air in anger. The pair of eyes she saw in the rearview mirror were old and could have belonged to any of her six aunts. Ay, Chihuahua. How Marissa's grandmother bore children, all female, all large, all different as pepper from salt. Marissa admonished herself for yelling as the elderly driver. Maybe it was one of his misdeeds, she told herself, and her rage dissolved. Her thoughts returned to Alicia, tucked away in a hospital bed, and then quickly to Roberto, the rat. If my boyfriend was cheating on me, she was brooding when she remembered that she didn't have a boyfriend. So what was the worry? She found herself shrugging and thinking she'd never have a boyfriend as she peeked at her stomach with its roll of fat. Room 438, she told herself as the salmon-colored hospital came into view. That's where my homegirl is. She's going to be hecka surprised. Marissa swallowed her fear. Hospitals were where you went to die. She remembered Grandma Olga's last days. Her grandmother, struggling with cancer, rolled from her side to her stomach to sitting on the bed and dangling her rope-thin legs. Dying, Marissa thought then, was a matter of getting comfortable. Marissa rode up in an elevator between two male nurses with paper booties on their shoes. She herself had considered becoming a nurse, but that was years before when she had dolls whose arms would fall off and she would stick the arms back on only to have them fall off again. The dolls she remembered lay under her bed, their eyes open but not taking in a whole lot. The elevator opened with a sigh. Marissa stepped out, glancing slowly left and then right. Room 438, she muttered as she cut a glance to a man in a wheelchair pushing himself up the hallway by the strength of his thin arms. A bottle of clear fluid hung on a steel pole behind him, and clear tubes were delivering that fluid into his arms. Marissa grimaced. She would hate to have something stabbed in her all day. Does it hurt like a pinch, she wondered? A bee sting? When she located a room, Alicia was staring gloomily toward the ceiling. For a moment, Marissa figured that Alicia was appealing to God in heaven. But as she stepped inside, she realized that Alicia's eyes were raised to a muted television. On the screen, some carpenter was carrying a sheet of plywood over his head. It was boring home decorating show, the kind her mother liked to watch on Saturday afternoons. Hey, girl, Marissa greeted loudly. Alicia lowered her eyes to her friend, and for a few seconds her face was expressionless. Then it slowly blossomed with a smile. Her eyes narrowed into little slits of light. Marissa, Alicia greeted in return. She raised a feeble hand. And Marissa grasped her friend's hand and gave it a loving squeeze, then smothered Alicia with a hug. How's it? Your pata? Marissa asked as she sat on the edge of the bed. It's not my leg, Alicia replied and wrapped her heart as if it were a door. It's this that's hurting. Marissa's eyes flashed as her mind fluttered with the image of Roberto. Sure, he got in trouble with his parents for crashing the car, but wasn't Alicia worse off? I told you he was no good, Marissa offered in judgment. Is your mom really mad? Alicia's mother was an accountant and not only good at numbers, but also at keeping tabs on her daughter's whereabouts. A little bit, actually, a lot, Alicia answered weakly. Her tiny hand squeezed her blanket. Marissa, a big girl whose shadow covered other people's when they walked together, couldn't help but think of Alicia as a little doll. She couldn't keep herself from saying, You look so tiny, girl. I am tiny. This truth made Marissa smolder. How dare Roberto cheat on my little homegirl? How she would love to get him in a headlock and bounce his head off a wall. She had watched enough wrestling on TV to know how to do it. My mom says I can't see him anymore. My mom would be hecka mad, Marissa said. And my dad? She shrugged. She wasn't clear how her dad would view such a tragedy. He was a lot more carefree, but her mom, she pictured her mother at the stove smashing beans into refritos and yelling over the radio that her daughter was headed down the wrong road, blah, blah, blah. What are you doing here? How come you're not at school? Lisa asked. Seeing you, Marissa replied. I just walked right out of school in 2 miles to get here. She pinched her stomach. I'm going to start losing weight. You look good, mentirosa. Marissa swiped a light slap on her friend's arm. She repeated how she had bounced down the stairs of a second floor East Hall and walked out of a Washington high school during morning break. The security guard had even waved goodbye. That was how much they didn't care. Alicia placed a hand over her mouth and laughed. Your mama. Your mom and dad's going to find out. So? But Marissa was worried. Her mom had threatened that if she got in trouble again at school, she had been suspended for a week for fighting over lip gloss. She had let some girl she was going to send her away to live with one of her aunts. Marissa didn't want to get in trouble again, but the idea of going to a new school appealed to her. She knew that she would miss a few friends, but she could always depend on her cell phone. Each month she was loaded with free minutes. Alicia's eyes suddenly filled and two lines of tears raced down her cheeks. Marissa thumbed the salty track making its way down to the left side of Alicia's chin. She was amazed how cool the tear was. If she were crying, her tears would be hot as motor oil. Do you want me to hit him? Marissa asked. Her hand was closed into a rock hard fist. Who? Alicia asked. Sounded like a sad owl. Roberto. Roberto was tall but lanky. Marissa imagined that she could lower her shoulder and bulldoze him into lockers and follow up with a smacking slap to his face. This, too, she had learned from watching wrestling, who said TV was a waste of time. No, Alicia said, then pouted like a fish. I don't need him. You go, girl. Marissa smiled and leaned her face into her friend's shoulder. They hugged and told each other how they couldn't depend on anyone except each other. Marissa's own tears began to roll hot from her eyes, but the girls stopped hugging when Marissa heard a voice behind her. The voice belonged to someone Marissa knew, her mother. Busted. Marissa thought as she swiped away the tears from her eyes and sat up. Hi, Mrs. Rodriguez, Alicia greeted. I asked Marissa to come and see me. Marissa's mother stood with her hands propped on her hips. Her eyes narrowed darkly. She seemed to weigh whether Alicia was telling the truth. She shook her head, jangling her earrings, and made her judgment. You girls are lying. Marissa skipping school. You think I was born yesterday? Marissa opened her mouth, forging the image of a daughter shocked that a parent, a mother of all people, didn't believe her. She raised her hands to her chest as if to say, You mean me? She would have stamped her foot dramatically in protest to her mother's verdict, but she was sitting on the edge of the high hospital bed. Her feet didn't touch the floor. Don't say anything that I can use against you later. Her mother warned a storm beginning to rage inside her. Her mother sounded like the police, and to Marissa she was the police with her own court and punishment. It's my fault, Mrs. Rodriguez, Alicia piped up. I told her to come. Marissa's mother ignored her as she repeated the lie. Obvious because Marissa volunteered the truth. Nah, I came on my own, Mom. It's my fault. I'll be talking to you later, her mother told Marissa. Aren't you sorry I decided to come visit Alicia myself? She turned her hard gaze from her daughter to Alicia. Her mother's eyes softened, the storm inside subsiding. How are you, Mija? It's only a fracture, Alicia replied with her hand on her heart. The doctor is releasing me tomorrow. Cool, Marissa crowed. Marissa's mother frowned at her daughter. She then turned her attention to Alicia and asked if the doctor had prescribed pain pills and how long the leg would be in a cast. She didn't ask about the boy who had been driving the car when the accident occurred. I got some pills and it really didn't hurt so bad. It's just that it itches. Alicia pulled up the bedsheet and revealed a blue cast that came up to her thigh. She knocked on the cast. It's really hard. Marissa was curious how Alicia would shower. Wouldn't the cast get soggy and fall off? Instead, she asked, did they get you some getaway sticks, some crutches? Not yet. Someone's going to teach me how to use them today. They talked mainly about school and family. When Alicia mentioned the fall dance and a tide of tears rolled in her eyes, Marissa's mother patted her hand. She produced from her purse a small package of miniature white powdered donuts. I know that sweets aren't very good for you, her mother whispered after she gazed back at the door, where occasionally a nurse passed in the hallway. But these will make you feel better. They are better than pain pills. And forget about the dance. There'll be others. Marissa was going to snap. You never buy me donuts like that. But her mouth, which often got her into trouble, closed as quickly as it had opened. She realized that Alicia was hurt and that her mother was displaying her concern. Thank you, Mrs. Rodriguez. I love these, Alicia said. She opened up the package and offered the first donut to Marissa. Marissa was moved. She's a true friend, she told herself. She took a bite and then offered the rest to Alicia, who opened her mouth and closed it around the donut. Some crumbs fell onto the front of Alicia's hospital gown, but she scooped them up. She sucked them down like a vacuum, something Marissa knew that she would do in private, but never with anyone looking. The intimate gesture convinced her that Alicia was the best friend ever. Marissa's mother refused the donuts, but the girls ate until they were gone, and both were wishing for glasses of milk to wash them down. Okay, let's go, Marissa's mother ordered her daughter as she got off the bed, smoothing her dress. Marissa raised a hand as if holding a cell phone to her ear. Call you later? Alicia blew her friend a kiss. Mother and daughter rode the noiseless elevator down. Marissa expected her mother to yell at her, but her mother, looking into a compact and dabbing her mouth with red lipstick, instead told her that they had to stop at a repair shop. She had discovered a nail in the front left of her tire. Marissa was baffled. Roberto's parents' car had something wrong with the tire, and now a nail was protruding from the tire on their car. Were tire problems more common than she realized? She was mulling the new mystery when the elevator opened. Marissa gasped. In front of her stood Roberto, who looked like damaged goods because of the bandages on his head and right forearm. In his good arm, he cradled flowers that were at least a day old and already starting to sag. You shanky dude. She caught herself cursing in her mind. She pushed aside the guy who was with Roberto, both of her hands closed in fists. She couldn't help herself, even as their mother pulled on her and warned Marissa, stop. Marissa shrugged out of her mother's grip. You cheater. She loved you so much, Marissa yelled. She hauled off and fired a stiff punch into Roberto's iron flat stomach. She had always suspected that a tapeworm lay curled in there, devouring all those bags of Cheetos. Flowers popped out of his arm. She stomped on them and began to thrash him from all angles. Watching all that wrestling on TV was beginning to pay off. This is the end to chapter 1.